Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the D.S. Borkar Memorial Foundation and the India International Center, welcome to the seminar on Keys to Governance, Steel Frame. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers today. Dr. N.C. Saxena, the former Secretary Planning Commission, former Secretary Rural Development, and former Director of the Academy in Mussoorie. Shri Deepak Gupta, former Chairman of the UPSC and former Secretary, New and Renewable Energy. Professor Ujjwal Kumar Singh, Professor of Political Science at the University of Delhi. So we have Shri N.N. Vora, the President of the ISE. Shri Vora has been the Defense Production Secretary, the Defense Secretary, the Home Secretary, and post-retirement Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, and then Governor, Jammu and Kashmir. Shri Vora has kindly agreed to moderate the discussion. I was just, over tea, we were just talking. We have, between the three of them, about 120 years of civil service, So that's a very remarkable, and then representing the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. This is the 5th edition of the seminars on Keys to Governance in honor of my elder brother, Shekhar. Some of you who don't know of him, he was the banana boy on the Indian postage stamp, private sector administrator, citizen environmentalist, and advocate of empowerment of persons with disabilities. He passed away today in 2015. The earlier 4 seminars in the series have been on compliance and delivery, that was in 2016, political will in 2017, constitution as ideology in 2018, and education as empowerment in 2019. 4 of Shekhar's friends led the inaugural discussion on compliance and delivery. T.S. Krishnamurthy, the former Chief Election Commissioner of India. Shri Hardayal Singh Hardy is here, former Income Tax Ombudsman and Additional Secretary CVC, and now columnist at the Financial Express. Shri Rajiv Kher, the former Commerce Secretary. Professor Neera Chandyok, who was then a visiting professor at the Center for Law and Governance at JNU. In the second discussion, we again had 2 of Shekhar's friends leading the discussion. Dr. E.A.S. Sarma, former Economic Affairs Secretary and Power Secretary, and now a civil society campaigner for sustainable development based in Visakhapatnam. And Shri P.K. Tripathi, the former Chief Secretary of Delhi. Professor Gurpreet Mahajan, Professor, Center for Political Studies, JNU, and Dr. Ritika Khera, then Associate Professor of Economics at IIT Delhi, completed the panel. In the third discussion, we had Professor Balveer Arora, Professor Emeritus and Chairman, Center for Multi-Level Federalism, and former Professor JNU, Professor Nandini Sundar, Professor of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, Professor Vivek Kumar, Professor, Center for Study of Social Systems, JNU, and Dr. Himanshu, Associate Professor, Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU. In the fourth discussion, we again had 2 of Shekhar's friends leading the discussion. Professor Muchkund Dubey, President, Council for Social Development, who gave the keynote address. Professor Anita Rampal, Professor of Elementary and Social Education, Department of Education, Delhi University. Priyanka Singh, former Chief Executive, Seva Mandir, Udaipur, and Professor Geeta Nambasan, Professor Zakir Hussain, Center for Educational Studies, JNU. We at the Borkar Foundation are very conscious of gender participation. In the past discussions, there have been 16 speakers. Out of these, 7 have been women speakers. This is the first time that we have no woman speaker on the panel. It's just happened. It's not designed. Now, I can request the members of the Borkar family to present the Angavastram to the distinguished speakers. These Angavastrams come from Salem in Tamil Nadu and are called Ganga Jamuna. and represent our country's very strong and deep plural tradition. In Tamil Nadu, they call them Ganga Jamuna. I mean, can you imagine, sir? It's so deep our pluralism is. Can I request Sudha to present the Angavastram to Shri Vora? Hail to Dr. Saxena. So that's the Oxford connection again. Girija to Shri Gupta. And Raghav to Professor Ujjwal. So before we begin, can we light the lamp, sir? Yeah, thank you. Come. I would now request Shri Vora to moderate the discussion.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I have a little problem in speaking. Trust you'll excuse me. This is not the first time we are meeting in IIC to discuss issues relating to the functioning of the civil services in India. Not very long ago, when my colleague Deepak Gupta's book came out on civil services, we had a very useful discussion in another part of this complex. And today, amongst the distinguished panelists, two of my younger colleagues, Mr. N.C. Saxena, besides being secretary like all of us, I think I would consider his main engagement during his career as the master trainer, director of the Academy of Civil Services in Missouri, of all the services. And Deepak Gupta, my other colleague, I would look upon him as the master selector. Now, if the steel frame has devolved to a bamboo frame, you have before you this evening both the master selector and the master trainer. So you don't have to go very far in knowing where the fault lies. Now, but having said that, let me, Suhash, take a few minutes in. Whenever I hear criticism of one or the other kind about the functioning of the civil services, I remind myself that we are today a country of over 1.3 billion. We have land and sea borders which go beyond 23,000 kilometers. We have 1,200 island territories. We have some several million square kilometers of the EEZ. And our people, our communities, over 4,600 multi-religious communities, speaking nearly 180 languages and 600 dialects, and their socio-religious, socio-cultural traditions going far deep into 5,000 years of recorded history. So the governance of India, which relates to the civil services, is not such an easy and such a simple task as one would like to believe or postulate. And the second factor which I would like to emphasize before the discussion starts is that for how long have we been a country ruled from a central location? There are historians in this audience. I would stand corrected, but I would say that in a manner of speaking. It is only after the East India Company started its operations in our mainland, Regulation Act of 72, then the Mutiny 1857 when the Crown took over. And the Crown took over and they created the Covenanted Services, ICS, IP, and the less covenanted, lesser services. But in East India Company's time, the district officers, the magistrates and judges were buccaneers, they were soldiers, they were army people, they were traders, merchants, and they ran the show. So over a period of some 300 years, we have had seen the evolution of what we today call the civil services. Now the ICS, in their own time, I think they played a very useful role. They were serving the imperial masters. The terms of reference and the terms of objectives of the government were limited and clear, was revenues, maintaining essential order in the mainland and raising as much revenue as was physically possible through mindless exploitation of the natural resources available in our country. Now, coming closer to 47, when our country gained freedom, a host of enormous challenges which awaited us. There was colossal rioting, communal conflicts, killings, led to the partition, millions killed, millions evacuated, millions migrated. I belong to one of those millions, and I can't describe to you what the partition meant in terms of human suffering. And why I mention this is that the very depleted and fractured civil services structure of 47, the members of the ICS belonging to Pakistan had left overnight, if not earlier, for areas which were to comprise Pakistan. The Anglo-Indians had gone here and there. The true Brits had left back home. But not all Brits went back home. Some remained. Indian Christian and Anglo-Indian elements, fair number remained. Then our own purely Indian elements, they also remained. But very fractured, the whole system was destabilized. But ex-army men, some other people, the interim government pulled together all available resources and tried to run some form of government. Now, I dare say that whatever today's criticism when we talk of civil services, the millions who had to be fed, millions who had to be rehabilitated in tented colonies, shelter, food, toilet arrangements, drinking water, clothing, medical care, and besides that, a situation which was almost a food famine. There were no cereals, no food grains, and thousands of Russian shops emerged overnight. I have experiences of trying to negotiate those long queues in getting the rations, which were due per person at that time. All this was handled, I dare say, with a great deal of hard work, patience, and efficiency. And the country seen through up till 1950. We adopted our constitution, became sovereign democratic republic, and we the people gave to ourselves the objective of rendering justice unto ourselves, justice social, justice economic, justice political, and the framework of the constitution, the fundamental rights, the directive principles of state policy, they give the framework of the governance of our country. So we had the constitutional provisions of a pan-India network of interconnected institutions, statutory and constitutional, like the one my friend Deepak Gupta headed as chairman UPSC. That's a constitutional post. Likewise, he had state service commissions all over the country. We have the CAG, we have the accountant generals all over the country. So we had a network of institutions, constitution, statutory, the high courts and the Supreme Court, which gave us a certain form and personality as a country. And I think in the early years after we gained freedom, in the first 20 years or maybe even 30 years, till we started breaking up, till the emergency came, the foundations of nation building, roads, bridges, highways, bus system, transport systems, shipping, railways, airlines. We had the expansion of the colleges, universities, institutions of higher learning, science and technology, CSIR institutions, the foundations, early days of space, of atomic energy, which you've seen what enormous privileges, benefits we have drawn from these early initiatives, building of dams, expansion of irrigation systems, leading to the achievement of the Green Revolution, which is, I think, one of the most unspoken, unreferred to wonders of the world, feeding a country of now today 1.3 billion and exporting food grains from a situation in 47, though we were 330 million or so at that time, when we had no food grains even for one meal a day. So there have been enormous achievements, and I would dare say these were achieved, whatever one may say about the failures and losses, by the civil services of the day in the various states. Now, one word quickly about before Deepak and Naresh speak about their views. When we attained freedom and we adopted the Constitution, there was a very ferocious debate, not much publicized, not much written about. Deepak has referred to it in his book. Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, being severely opposed to the continuance of these services, ICS and IP, saying that these are the vestiges of the imperial authority in India, and unless they go, they are eliminated and replaced. We cannot have the beginnings of a new form of life, the transformation cannot take place with these people around. And as has been mentioned earlier, when the ICS came into being, they had so much authority in the earlier British days. They were called heaven-born, little Napoleons, and the word steel frame emerged at that time. But counter to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the view of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. He strongly believed that if the country was to be held together, and the impoverished economy had to be improved, upgraded, poverty had to be alleviated, literacy had to be improved, healthcare systems upgraded, longevity improved, employment opportunities improved, then the only way of some or the other providing equal standards in the whole country was to have an all India service like the ICS, and they would be amongst the best available in the country, selected on competition and merit, given the best possible training, and allocated to the states where they would form the state cadres, where they would work on the ground, gain familiarity with the real problems. After a given period of service, they would come on deputation to the center, get exposed to the larger perspectives, contribute to policy formulation, go back to the states and hold higher positions, and be able to contribute further to growth, development, and nation building. And that was the broad debate which in a manner of speaking, has been lost sight of. Now come quickly to the emergency period. We saw the breakdown of the Congress, 69. We found new caucuses and groups emerging. Authority, the political system, once you have authority, seize it, never let it go, whatever be the price. And during 75, 77, we saw the emergence of what was called the committed coteries, the loyalists amongst us, amongst our colleagues in the civil service. I was very much around in the service at that time, and I saw what havoc was played by those of us who volunteered to be more committed and more loyal. They, of course, ran the roost for those 2 years, and then after that, it was difficult to find where they'd gone. That period, unfortunately, the subsequent 20-25 years saw the rise of corruption in the higher echelons of our governance, which affected the ethics and values of the civil services. You had the Beaufort scandal, the submarine scandal, the fodder scam, Bihar. You had the suitcase scandal involving a sitting prime minister, and all that, and found DGs going to jail, chief secretaries being charge sheeted, ministers and former chief ministers going to jail, and all that environment which led to the early 90s. And in less than a decade, I was still in service part of the 90s, 4 changes of government at the center, 4 quick general elections, coalitions, which were Delhi, the central government was free from coalitions earlier, but it didn't become any longer possible to have some form of government without a coalition. So after that, you've seen what you have. More recent times, my colleagues will speak about it. I will conclude by saying that our problems, notwithstanding the enormous achievements we have made, the growth, the development in various arenas of all arenas, sectors of functioning, we still have a population which we call below poverty line, or poverty stricken, BPL, which is still very significant. So, and there are debates about how you measure poverty, whether in nutrition terms or in fixed dollar terms or whatever per capita incomes. But we still have something like, let's say, some 18-20% of our population, which is still to be uplifted. We have social and economic depression amongst these communities, socially depressed, economically depressed. They are denied the average facilities of living a decent life, a normal life. We have problems of lack of equity, we have problems of inequality, and we have injustice because of the failure of our justice system, more particularly the criminal justice system. I would say in very brief that there has been failures of the executive, the appointed executive, failure of the political executive, the elected people, more recent time failure of judiciary in leading from where they should have led. So all in all, we have enormous problems facing us today. And I believe, subject to what my expert colleagues say, that in a country of our size, with the poverty of the dimension we still have, the people who are denied, who are still suffering, and we are a declared welfare state, our directive principles of state policy lay down our objectives, we cannot afford to think of everything being outsourced and private sector being touted as the answer to our problems. The public sector must not fail, it cannot be allowed to fail. A public sector is to perform its duties and to promote the goals of nation building in our country. Our civil services cannot fail. And I would much rather use the word public services, because I think the so-called superiority of the IAS and IPS is all gone. We have the state services, which are very important, sons of the soil, they run the governance of the states. But one final word, and that is that success of the civil services or of the administrative structure of the governmental machinery will depend on 2 other factors, which have nothing to do with the quality of human beings that Deepak Gupta has been selecting. And that is the relations between the union and the states, what kind of relations we maintain. And B, we need very close understanding between the political executive and the appointed executive. We cannot see each other apart. Unfortunately, over the last several decades, functioning of civil services have been politicized. We have gone by caste, color, and creed. We have gone by political loyalties. We have been transferring people by the hundreds every week in a state like UP. We made it into industry. In fact, at one point of time, the IAS Association, the younger lot happened to come to IIC. Among other matters, they met me. I was serving here at that time. And they said to me, some of them who were very bright boys and girls, that certain posts adjoining Delhi, Noida and all, are being auctioned at a price. That if you can pay that kind of price, you can be the collector or whatever. So I would say that there have been ups and downs, there have been pitfalls, very serious blemishes, aberrations, but the future of our country, I continue to believe, is secure and safe in the hands of loyal, trusted, non-committed public servants, public services who are professionally trained, whose interests are looked after, and who do not have to be on the run most of their careers. Now, having said that, it's now almost 7 o'clock. I would first request my good colleague Naresh Saxena, I believe is going to talk to us for at least 15 minutes on issues relating to the deliveries in social sector, following which I will request Mr. Deepak Gupta, then Professor Ujjwal Singh.
Thank you very much, sir, for this opportunity. As you all know, India has done very well in economic growth in the last 30 years. We have also done very well in roads, in supplying power to rural areas, also in supplying gas and kerosene in rural areas. But we have not done so well in social sector like education, like health and nutrition. In fact, the cynic view is that wherever contractors are involved, India does very well. But wherever services have to be provided directly by government, we don't do so well. And this may be the anecdotal view, but when you look at the facts are that if you look at the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, India failed to achieve Millennium Development Goals in respect of health, nutrition, gender, hunger, and many sanitation and many others. India's progress is worse than countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Vietnam, countries which are poorer than India and which cannot boast of a very good civil service. We in India can boast of a very qualified, very competent civil service. We all know 10 lakhs appear, and Deepak selects only 200 out of 10 lakhs for the IAS, so they have to be the best of the lot. So how is it that a very competent civil service, and I have also said in my book that they're comparatively honest and also keep themselves away from politicians, although things may have changed in the last 20, 30 years. But by and large, they are good, but their individual competence is not in doubt. But how is it that individual competence is not getting translated into group achievement, into achievement at the field? That is what I have examined in the field. And I have given general feeling is that, look, our policies are good, programs are good, implementation is bad. I have said that no, certain programs which are not doing very well, especially safety net programs, they have a design flaw which needs to be corrected at the level of the Joint Secretary or the Secretary of Government of India. And unless you correct that design flaw, the programs will continue to remain badly implemented. Take, for instance, NREGA. If you look at NREGA, as you know, is for rural poor. So if you compare Bihar with, say, Kerala, you'll find that per rural poor expenditure last year in Bihar was 900 rupees. And per rural poor expenditure in NREGA in Kerala was 16,000 rupees. So where there is no poverty, we are spending more money. Where there's less poverty, we are spending too much money. Compare Bihar with, say, Tamil Nadu. Bihar has 6 times more rural poor than Kerala. Expenditure in Tamil Nadu, and expenditure in Tamil Nadu is 4 times the expenditure in Bihar. Now, this can easily be corrected by issuing a simple order that allocation to each state would be in proportion to the number of rural poor in that state. I was Secretary of Rural Development and I had designed the PMGS5, Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana, where I said that allocation to each state would be in proportion to the number of unconnected habitations in that state. With the result, if you look at the figures for the last 6 years, you find that maximum expenditure has been in Bihar, followed by Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, and least has been in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc., because they don't have unconnected habitations. So simple changes can really improve the performance of our so-called safety net programs. Take, for instance, ICDS, which is meant for nutrition for the infants. Now, every day we hear Amitabh Bachchan saying that this program is for first 1,000 days. Find out from the field how much time the Anganwadi worker spends on those children who are just 1 year old or 2 years old. Child who is 1 year old cannot walk to the Anganwadi center. The whole concept of Anganwadi center is flawed. She should spend more time with the families and looking after what is, it's not only food, it's also a question of what are the other inputs which are being provided. But that doesn't happen. Her time is spent only on the age group 3 to 5 years. So that is flaw number one in that design. Secondly, if you look at the entire money is being spent on the ready-to-eat food, which is being manufactured by some industry. And there are results, there are evaluations to show that 80 to 90% of that gets spent in corruption. In fact, a study by British University showed that in Hardoi, in UP, it is no longer called Paustik Ahar. It is called Pashu Ahar, because it is all being fed to cattle. I was Supreme Court Commissioner looking after this program, and I got an order issued by the Supreme Court that no contractor would be involved in supply of supplementary nutrition. But unfortunately, none of the states, whether it is UP, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Gujarat, none of the states agreed with this, and the material continues to be supplied by contractors, leading to grand corruption. To give an example, we got a study done of Gorakhpur in UP by the National Human Rights Commission, which showed that 80% of the total funds get spent in corruption. I sent that study to the Secretary of the Chief Minister, who was my student. After a fortnight, I rang him up. I said, Alok, I sent you the study. What happened? He said, Arey sir, ये तो Ponty Chadha का मामला है. इसमें हम क्या कर सकते हैं? Meaning that by Ponty Chadha is a contractor. And then he later told me that the minister concerned takes about 100 crores every year as bribes from the contractor, and that's how it is being continued. Again, a simple change. If you just compare supplementary nutrition with the midday meals program, where food is being cooked at the village level itself, a simple change that, look, Government of India should issue instructions that nothing would come from contractors or industry. Food has to be cooked at the village level itself. That's the second change is needed. Thirdly, which is common to many programs, look at the figures of undernourished children at the level of the Anganwadi center. You'll be surprised to know Government of India may say that 40% children are stunted. If you go to the village and look at the register, not even 5% children are undernourished. I went to a Anganwadi center. I said, look, why don't you show all these children seem to be undernourished? नहीं साहब, ऊपर से आदेश है कि 100 में से सिर्फ एक बच्चा दिखाना है. Meaning thereby that because all the data which is kept at the Anganwadi center, it is all fudged, it is all bogus. That is why you find that nothing. I mean, how to make your system responsible for this. Accountability can never be established. And this is not only for Anganwadi centers. You find similar thing happen in health. Look at the immunization figures. Look at the figures of sanitation. I recall in 2012-13 when census figures came out, it was showing that Maharashtra was showing 85% rural households have toilets. Census figure showed only 35%. So that was the gap between the evaluated and the reported data. I recall I went to Maharashtra. I was looking after this program in UNICEF in those days. And she showed me the figures. I said, Vandana, all your data is bogus. She said, sir, don't call it bogus. This is advanced statistics. This is what we will achieve after 20 years. But we are very fond of this program. So we are reporting it right now. So the point here I'm trying to say is that there may be, I'm not saying anything about the overall political climate. There are these nitty-gritty issues which we need to sort out. And it can easily be done by just the Joint Secretary concerned should be able to say that every secretary in the state government will ensure that there is the reported data and the evaluated data, they must coincide, that the gap must be narrowed. That can be done. This is not something which requires, very big changes. It can be done without any, these are all apolitical issues. They don't require any interference from the political masters. I recall I had gone to Missouri, and this was phase 3. So all collectors, they were being trained. So I said, look, why don't you sign on a file when you know that this data is fudged? One collector got up, he said, sir, reporting correct data is a high risk and low reward activity. If I report correct data, government will take action against me, but my batchmates and friends will go scot-free. So again, it's a question of someone in the state government and government of India trying to see that the data is not fudged. Then there is question of flow of funds. There are states where, especially Bihar and Orissa and UP and Jharkhand, where they are not able to even ensure that contractual staff gets paid in time. I recall some years back, I had gone to Bihar where Anganwadi workers, the poorest paid government employees, they were being paid their salaries only once in 6 months. That is the status of IAS officers are not able to ensure that that salaries are paid in time. Recently, there was a study by our center at CPR showing that contractual staff in education is getting paid salaries with a delay of 3 or 4 months. Another example I'll give you of Bihar. Speaker had invited me to speak to the assembly in Bihar, and Mr. Nitish Kumar was sitting there, and Mr. Modi, they were all on the dais. I showed them a slide which showed that in the cadre of supervisors of ICDS, there were 92% vacancies. I looked at Mr. Nitish Kumar, I said, sir, today you can give jobs to 5,000 young women and pass on the bill to Government of India, because the entire salary of CDPOs and supervisors is borne by Government of India. But the system is so rotten, they are not able to even recruit people when money is being paid by Government of India. So much so that in 2006 or 7, when Nitish Kumar ji has just taken over as Chief Minister, they were very keen to spend money. But what happened was, because they could not spend money, they asked UNICEF that please take our money and spend it. You will expect a poor state to get money from United Nations. Here was just the opposite. The poor state is giving money to UNICEF and saying, please spend this money. So UNICEF said, sir, we don't mind spending money, but our rules are that 18% of our money has to go to Copenhagen office, the accounts office. They said, please go, yes, give 18% to them. So Bihar, the poorest state of India, is giving 18% money to Copenhagen. That is the tragedy of our situation. Now let me just make 2-3 other points. So therefore, accountability is not established, because we also have a very large number of archaic rules and laws which we have not changed. You'll be surprised to know that in Rajasthan, there's a law, Section 46 of Tenancy Act, which equates women with lunatics and idiots. Lunatics, idiots, and women have been put in the same category in Rajasthan. I wrote a letter to Chief Secretary Rajasthan to change it. Women of Rajasthan are very happy. They're very happy with this law. No one has asked me to change this, so we'll continue with this. So therefore, there are such laws. Again, if you look at land laws, in none of the states farmer can establish industry on its own land. You require permission from the collector or from the state government because you can't change land use. Although everyone knows that when you change land use from agriculture to non-agriculture, more employment is generated. But again, these laws which were framed in British days are still continuing. Now, let me just uh, give a few more examples about this. Now, there is also, when you look at the nature of our bureaucracy, see, first of all, the total number is not is much less than the international average. We have just about, I think, 1.2% of our government of our population is in government. The world average is about 3. But out of this 1.2%, you will find that there are a very large number of people who are not needed. Drivers, orderlies, cooks, babus. So people who are in the staff position are too many. People who can deliver, like doctors, nurses, teachers, even policemen, munsifs, they are in short supply. So line position staff is missing, support position staff is too much. Secondly, you find that the line position staff, like the para teachers or the contractual doctors, they are poorly paid, and the support staff who was permanent, they are very well paid. Then you find that the average salary if you compare with the GDP, you find that Indian salaries are one of the highest as a ratio of per capita GDP, which is about seven times per capita GDP of our per capita GDP. World average is again about 3. So therefore, despite high salaries, we find that because of lack of accountability, lack of delivery, lack of finding out the outcomes, there is no tradition of doing evaluations in the states. You can get away, our administration has always been input-based. Again, give an example here. I went to a school in Jharkhand, in Singhbhum district. This is class 6th. I wrote on the blackboard 31 minus 18. And I asked the students to do this two-digit subtraction in class 6. Half the students could not do it. But that is known to everyone. Then I went to the collector. I said, Nitin, I had gone there and this is what I saw. Don't you monitor outcomes? He said, sir, you are the first person to be asking me this question. Government has never asked me this. Government wants to know how much money was given to you, how much was spent, how many classrooms built, how many teachers appointed, how many students are learning, getting midday meals. There is no column in my format about the quality of outcomes. So that is the tragedy, that we don't monitor outcomes, and we are very happy we think that if inputs are provided, if money is spent, then it will obviously lead to outcomes, which doesn't happen, as we know, both in terms of health, education, nutrition. We keep on spending money, but outcomes are not achieved because outcomes are not measured. There is no dearth of formats in our system. In fact, one evaluation showed they were evaluating teachers' performance. So question was, how do you define a good teacher? And the block level officer, who's just above the teachers, he said, a good teacher is one who sends all his formats in time. Because his responsibility is that he must send all the formats. What is written in those formats is not anyone's responsibility. It may be all bogus data that is not ever checked, and therefore we keep on feeding bogus data to the state government and no one bothers, there is collusion. So friends, what I'm trying to say is that if we have not achieved as much progress as it is in Bangladesh or Vietnam or Nepal, we must really examine what is wrong with our system. And there are these simple reforms which can easily achieve results. I will just make 2 more points. One is that the reforms which I have listed are not on the agenda of any chief secretary or any such person. I recall when I had just joined the service, my chief secretary, Mr. K.K. Das, he said, our system looks after what is urgent. It does not look after what is important. And I think this is what, in my 40 years of service, I think this is what he said was very correct. And I can give another example. I met a very good health secretary in Madhya Pradesh, and I was telling him, look, we should do this, 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 this. He said, sir, where is the time for all these reforms? 90% of my time is spent in transfers and postings. So therefore, all the time I'm sort of getting recommendations from politicians, and I'm dealing with that. There's no time for these reforms. So friends, what I'm trying to say is that, first of all, the system is status quoist. Everyone believes that, look, change is very difficult, and then let's continue with the status quo. Secondly, our tenure is very short. Again, a study was done which shows that in UP, the tenure of an average collector was less than 6 months. So in fact, as I have said in my book, भाई अगर हफ्ते की posting होगी तो हफ्ता बनाते रहेंगे. This is what is happening. And lastly, I must say that this is, IS officers do not like my saying this, but I must say it, that it is the only service, maybe also IPS and other such all India services, where everyone is promoted to the highest level. In UP today, there are 18 officers of the level of Chief Secretary. So what happens is, one is fellow as Chief Secretary, there are 17 others who are all the time trying to approach the politicians and trying to see that I'm out and he comes in. So therefore, that is what is leading to this kind of nexus with politicians, because of 18 fellows being in the same rank. So this is again something which we need to really look. I know that it's very difficult to, would be considered a very unpopular measure. But just as in the army, we don't allow everyone to become the general. People retire as level of collectors, of colonels and brigadiers. Similarly, we must find some method by which we can get we can sort of retire fellows at the level 50, 55, and so on and so forth, so that we don't have the system where there are too many people competing for the same job. Friends, I'll stop here, and maybe if there are more questions, I can say something more. Thank you.
Our friends, you heard Mr. Saxena. I agree with them entirely that we don't have a system of measuring outcomes. In other words, accountability. One statement he made, which he didn't expatiate upon, was that collector telling him, what do we do about the 100 crores which Mr. Ponty Chadha takes away? I think this also bears with some, we need to discuss this aspect also, because if Mr. Chaddas of the world, they keep on taking 100 crores, what do the collectors do? And then where do you measure the outcomes, accountability? Deepak, will you please now take the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Borkar, for inviting me, and I'm honored to be with my senior colleagues, Mr. Vora and Mr. Saxena and Professor Ujjwal. There is so much to be discussed on this subject, so I will restrict myself to some general 3 or 4 points which I think impact the so-called steel frame as well as governance or good governance. I think we are all seeing somewhat chaotic times today, and even as the complexity of the problems increase, excessive politicization, divisive political discourse, extreme frictions between states and center, and the weakening of institutions. And I go back and look at the chaotic times following the Quit India movement and up to the independence and partition. As Mr. Vora said, many at that time, including Pandit Nehru, wanted to throw out the civil service. But it was Sardar Patel who saw the All India service at that time as a bulwark of unity in the country. In a sense, that continues to be true today, and there is really no other administrative model. Sardar Patel was also very worried and probably very correct about future politicization. He noted, and I quote, that an efficient, disciplined and contented service, assured of its prospects as a result of diligent and honest work, is a sine qua non of sound administration. And very importantly, he added, and this is something in which we should all ponder, even more important in a democratic regime than under an authoritarian rule. And therefore, political considerations, either in its recruitment or in its discipline or control, must be eliminated altogether. He thus saw the IAS or the All India Services as a protective ring round the Constitution. He also believed strongly, and in order to perform that role, that this good All India Service must have the independence to speak out its mind. In the Constituent Assembly, he said, I have told my secretary that if you do not give your honest opinion for the fear it will displease your minister, you had better go. Of course, today, if the secretary or any other gives such an opinion, he will go. And those who conform will prosper. The other day, Telangana has appointed a chief secretary who is 14th in seniority. What will you expect in Telangana? Now, this has become a normal practice in center and states, and this erosion, I think, is fundamental to the corrosion of good governance in the country. Up to the First World War, interestingly, the nationalist demand was for more Indians to enter the Indian civil service. But as more representative governments started, the demand increasingly turned to transfer the ICS to the states in order that there should be political control. And this is again what Sardar Patel opposed very strongly. And in meeting in the chief ministers, he said, and I quote, in a country of multicultural communities, there would be provincial susceptibilities. But it was precisely because of these that a service modeled on the ICS alone would be efficient, impartial, free from local or communal bias, party allegiance, or political influence. A locally controlled service under any government of the day could not, on the contrary, act independently or offer resistance to local politics or intrigues. So not only has the political control since tightened, both in the center and certainly in the states, but the All India Service, and this is something which you should ponder over, is increasingly becoming provincialized with all the dangers that the Sardar had visualized. 1/3 of the service is to promotion from the state civil service. Officers who are not impaneled remain in the states. Of those who are impaneled, many from the state prefer to stay on in the states, while the outsiders move on. So what then should we do for this problem? And I have some suggestions. First, stop promotion from the state services, which was more of a colonial practice, and have many, many more direct recruits. Second, remove the pernicious differential between empanelment and promotion. It is indeed ironical that those officers not considered good enough to go to the center reach the highest positions in the state. And additional secretaries in Government of India should be sent right back to the states. Third, this necessitates that the process of promotion be made much more rigorous and done independently by the UPSC. And fourth, which was mentioned here, those not meeting minimum standards must be compulsorily retired with suitable pension. It has been repeatedly noted in organizational literature that nothing affects performance and morale more adversely than officers without merit or those who are corrupt or complicit reaching the highest positions. Fifth, reduce maximum age for exams and number of attempts for which there is general national consensus. Incidentally, when the Prime Minister reviewed the 100 aspirational districts, he found that most of the collectors and CEOs were actually very old and from the state services, and he wanted younger officers. Now, these straightforward structural changes, which will improve significantly both the character and performance of officers, why is it not happening is the question that we should ask. And I am very surprised at the lack of public discussion on these issues. And of course, our associations, they have the deafening silence from them. Now, Mr. Saxena has rightly criticized the IAS. By definition, all the things that he has mentioned have fallen on the shoulders of IAS officers. Uh, and there is considerable criticism that is fair and valid, and therefore we must look into that. But is that only the fault of the IAS officers? And that is a question. If a teacher does not teach in a rural school, is the collector responsible for improving the... In UP, at one time, 71,000 teachers were appointed under the Mulayam Singh regime. Then they went to court, that was cancelled. Then under Mayawati's regime, 71,000 teachers. I think they are still being appointed. So you can't blame for a fundamental thing. And I have a series of things. If the Anganwadi does not function, if immunization is not done, what are the people who are responsible for these things who are doing? Why are we growing more sugar and paddy and wheat when water is scarce? Why are the discoms bankrupt? Why are the banks having all um, uh, NPAs? Is it all IAS officers doing, or the IAS as a service is doing with the misgovernance in this country? And a World Bank study had noted some time ago, quite some time ago, the IAS today battling against onslaughts to its relevance. In fact, Mr. Nirmal Mukherjee started the question, abolish it, as if all our problems will go away simply by abolishing the IAS. The strength of the service lies in its extraordinary pool of skills and talents, its field of experience, its extensive networking, its appreciation and overview of the functioning of the government at the cutting edge, its understanding of delivery systems for development, awareness of the formal and informal socio-economic networks in the field, its can-do attitude, its role in national integration, its ready adaptability. So this strength only the IAS service has. We need to recognize it, we should not denigrate it, and we need to strengthen it with the right reforms. And whether there is political interest or not, or support or not, there are any number of outstanding, I can give so many examples of good work that IAS officers have done. We have not catalogued it, we don't talk about it, so only the criticism comes about. More than a decade ago, the World Bank published a large number of case studies of reforms in states and public delivery. And it said, it noted that in almost all cases, there was an IAS officer at the helm of affairs. And it concluded that when properly empowered by politicians, the IAS can be transformed into an effective instrument for innovation. They also listed out certain conditions of support. Those conditions of support are needed. That is what we are not doing. Much positive change will happen. So this criticism and denigration has led to now a sort of people considering as panacea that you should have large-scale infusion of lateral entry into the service. Now, it is certainly justified in for some limited post, etc. But if you do it wholesale, I think it's disaster, because it is basically going to outsource policy, possibly also implementation, to short tenure contractors from different sources in the private sector. And indeed, it is ironical that a system which prevents IAS officers from specializing, actively prevents, and also does not post those IAS officers who have specialized into the areas where they have specialized, and then say these are generalists and don't fit the bill. This can't happen. Of course, we must professionalize the service, and since the IAS has a primary responsibility, we must measure up to much higher standards. I believe, therefore, that this steel frame needs to get more steel, but for that, much within the service, as also within the system, needs to change. In my book, I have therefore given a chapter on the reinvention of the IAS. And the sooner it happens, the better it will be for good governance in this country. Thank you.
Professor Ujjwal Singh.
So thank you so much, Mr. Boker, and it's a real privilege to sit along with some of the truly sturdy steel frame over here. We read your work, we know about what you've done, and that's so encouraging for all of us. And to many young colleagues and young students, I'm addressing those people. This is more in the realm of state theory, which I'm going to take you, because I'm not trained, I'm not equipped to actually talk about civil servants. In research, we have found that there's a huge gap, and much of what Mr. Saxena said, what we require is honest and deep research in many of the things, because most of the thing what we quote and cite is coming from universities abroad. So it's something seriously lacking, and we have seen that we do not have access even with the best of effort, but maybe at the grassroots level we can do that. So I'm going to bring you three things very briefly. One, start with state theory. Another, I'm going to bring in the constitutional provisions, which Mr. Bohra also referred to. And third, some illustrations from the realm of electoral governance, because that's one area, the conduct of elections, and I'm not talking about the just top excellence of the election machinery. I'm talking about entire election machinery, which runs from top to down, which has performed, we believe, very well, very efficiently. So some illustration from that. This is part of a study which I've done with Professor Roy. And the method is normative, but I won't like to be prescriptive over here. I'm not even trained to comment on what you do. So this is more about structure. And I'll take the entire governing elite, which would include higher civil servants to down below. So term normally one would use either governing elite, not ruling elite, but this is something very interesting with Mr. Borka when you asked me to do that. I went back to a book which was published in 1969, a British scholar, Ralph Miliband, and he has a book on state in capitalist society. And chapter 5 is titled Servants of the State. So when I was doing my MA 83-85, I read about Miliband's theory, but the chapter I read precisely for this, Servants of the State. And he brings the issue of neutrality and how bureaucrats claim to be neutral, but he says this is not fair. They're not neutral, they're part of the structure of the government, and they are placed in a certain society, a capitalist society. His own study was that many of the bureaucrats in Britain were recruited from Oxford background. Now, I believe that's not true for a country like India. It's some elite institutions do produce more bureaucrats, but over the years, it has gone to different strata, different realms. So representation has increased, but with that representation, whether and inclusiveness has also increased, but whether accountability is still there or not, that's the challenge. Because once the service takes over, probably accountability is something which is lacking over there. Miliband says the true position lies somewhere in between these extremes. The general pattern must be taken to be one in which these men do play an important part in the process of governmental decision making, and therefore constitute a considerable force in the configuration of the political power in these societies. So Miliband, as a Marxist, is giving very serious attention to administrators. Normally what we have read is that Marxists would say, well, these are some instrument of the capitalist class. If we actually read a Marxist scholar, he says no, such people have a very important role to play in the society. Now, but something which was written in 1946 by a French writer, and what it's something which is happening nowadays. Many young bureaucrats have given up a job because of course, I won't name them, they're from Kashmir to Kerala, and many senior bureaucrats are joining corporate groups. Raghuram Rajan actually talked about crony capitalism, and there is some link which we all are aware of. Let's hear what this French writer is writing in 1946. As early as 1946, a French writer was arguing for the elite making up of a grand corps of the state, since the administration is now but the antechamber to business position. Since then, the pattern has become much more pronounced. For a good many years, another French writer notes, the Finance Inspection Service and the Council d'Etat, the prefects and sous-prefects who head French regional and local administration, have supplied major French industries with growing number of higher executives, vice presidents, and presidents. Indeed, this writer speaks of the likely construction of one single oligarchy of managers or technocrats working in business, public industries, or governments. Precisely the same conclusion applies to other capitalist countries. You can use the term India as a developing society, industrialized societies. One could also use the term capitalist society. It is very strong, robust capitalism which is here. This interchangeability between government service on one kind or another and business is particularly characteristic of this new breed of technocrats who have been spawned by the economic interventions of the new capitalist state and who wield considerable influence and power in a variety of departments, planning, organisms, regulatory boards, financial and credit institutions, nationalized industries and services. Written in 46, but it seems it's actually written for India in 2020. Now, people may actually have their own normative framework and say, what's wrong with that? Because these are trained people who are giving some boost to industry, but probably there's much more to that. I'm not in a position to talk about Ponty Chadha, but the linkage is pretty obvious, sir.
Nobody is willing to do it.
So,
But by the way, he's dead and gone now.
yeah, of course. So idea is we have
The hands of his brother.
yes. So the link has to be established, and there is a fair degree of link. That's why one really respects who have still kept the steel frame alive, and especially because we academicians have to talk to young students who have aspirations, who want to join civil services, and the best of things are pretty bad because public universities have been dismantled. So the best of the lot which came to research, now we are actually pushing them go for civil services because probably there'll be some fairness over there. The other small stream which I want to bring in is one about constitutionalism and the governing elite, the ruling elite as such. What's the relationship between the two? So the promise of independence and constitutionalism in post-colonial societies was not just of self-rule. It was about a democratic state. Swaraj was there, but it was about establishing a state, democratic state. The pathways may be different. Nehru also wanted a just means and a strong state. Patel also wanted a strong state. And above all, Ambedkar also wanted. If we read his writings on Election Commission of India when it was established, he was a firm adherent to the fact that there has to be centralized apparatus because that will take care of inequalities which are taking place and some respect for plurality would happen. So Dr. Ambedkar also stood by this. Now, there's a section in his speech on 4th November 1946, he speaks about why there's so much of detail about administration in the Constitution. Because it was critiqued, the Constitution was critiqued that there's so much about administration. It is governance-heavy text, whereas most of the constitutions are not governance-heavy. So we know that there's a whole section, part 14 of the Constitution, which deals with services, and there's a protection for services, and that's very important. But there was something more what Ambedkar wanted to say, and that's becoming so relevant today that at least the structure of the government is enshrined in the Constitution. Now, this is what he says, and I'm just saying his final thing, and then I'll elaborate. It is perfectly possible to pervert the Constitution without changing its form, by merely changing the form of the administration, and to make it inconsistent and opposed to the spirit of the Constitution. So you can have the text of the Constitution, but if you change the administration, you have perverted the Constitution. In that sense, he said it's important that the structure of the government, the administration, should also be enshrined over there, because no party, no group, no ideological affiliation could come and just subvert it in that sense. And he said it's important to lay down these things part of the Constitution because we lack constitutional morality. That is somewhere the respect of the Constitution, and there's a whole detail about its fraternity and public conscience, other detail as such. So Dr. Ambedkar says on 4th November 1948, it follows that it is only where people are saturated with constitutional morality, such as the one described by Groth, the historian, that one can take the risk of omitting from the Constitution details of administration and leaving it for the legislature to prescribe them. Question is, can we presume such a diffusion of constitutional morality? Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. And here, there's a rationale for administration as a part of the Constitution, because you can subvert it. Now, probably that's something so important in the present juncture, where there is a pressure from right-wing political formations. Earlier, there was pressure from left-wing political formation. In that sense, probably there is need for impartiality and neutrality. That's the point which probably was. Now, the third and the last element which I want to bring in some illustrations from the electoral governance. How does electoral governance works? It requires procedural certainties. Rules of the game have to be there, set in beginning. It has to be true, same for all actors, all players, but it leads to, the outcome has to be uncertain. If the outcome is certain, it is fraud. Fine? So the procedural certainties leading to uncertainty in outcome, that has to be there. But in the first place, who is there to govern procedural certainties? Because you may have, and we do have Election Commission of India, it's constitutional body, and we do have Representation of People Act, but ultimately it's the officials at local level, at the booth level, at the constituency level, at the block level, at the district level, and then to the top. That's what they have to do that. So, interestingly, one of the scholars, again I'm quoting from a study which is not from India, Lan Pritchett, and this is John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University working paper. Now, Pritchett is asking an interesting question, whether India is a flailing state, not failing, flailing state. To explain the dissonance between the strong head of the state, I'm not talking about the prime minister, I dare not. So it's a strong head of the state, referring to the strength of the higher bureaucracy in drafting programs and policies, and its weakness in implementing them. That's what Mr. Saxena was talking about. The programs and policies would be drafted up there. Pritchett refers to in particular to the domain of police, tax collection, education, health, power, and water supply, exactly what we were referring to, and says all the routine services were rampant absenteeism, indifference, incompetence, and corruption have led to the coexistence in India of elite institutions and chaotic conditions in service provider. So you have elite institutions, no doubt on that account, but the service provider over there, the service which you provide, there's a huge gap between the design over there and, so she would say, flailing state. So this is a quote from the research piece. I argue that India is today a flailing state, a nation state in which the head, that is the elite institutions at the national and some states and in some state levels, remain sound and functional, but this head is no longer reliably connected with the nerves and sinews to its own limbs. So somewhere you have at the top, but it's not connected to the nerves. So it is flailing in that sense. Now, in study by Singh and Roy, one has shown that the robustness of both head and the limbs at the level of national, state, and district level. The constitutional safeguards, the inherent powers of self-regulation have contributed to making ECI, Election Commission of India, a relatively autonomous bureaucratic institution with a distinctive identity deriving from the democratic logic of the state. Now, it needs to be separated. It has to be institutional autonomy. Now, all institutions in that sense require institutional autonomy. Now, Election Commission of India, Comptroller Auditor General, they do have institutional autonomy because they're constitutionally bound and they have certain safeguards over there. But that's not true for regular governance. The question which many of us asked is, if governance is so efficient, so fair and so just during election time, which is a special time, the day you announce, Model Code of Conduct comes into existence until the time of voting. That time, and we talked to Sir Iqbal, DC of Srinagar, so we went to Riyasi and met him. We went to Bihar, met Mr. Nayak, and he really interviewed us. He was such a good officer. He had everything on the tips, so it's difficult to ask him questions because he always said, why are you asking this? So we were asking, if electoral governance works so well, then why it does not translate into other times? Now, election time is a special time, fine, in terms of periodicity. And during Model Code of Conduct, all the cases which are filed, but once election time is over, what we have learned is not Election Commission anyway who has a role to play. It is regular police, regular administration which has come to play a role over there. Now, why is election time special and why governance works? This is Mr. Ajay Nayak, CEO of the state of Bihar. And he questions this whole thesis of paralysis of government because the Model Code of Conduct comes, the political class immediately says there's a paralysis of government because you cannot introduce welfare programs. Now it's only for a certain period that election time happens. But prior to that, 4.5 years or 5 years, you cannot bring in welfare measures. So what he says that this paralysis in governments during election time, indeed they argue that election time produces an extraordinary convergence at the local level between the existing bureaucratic apparatus for local administration and the electoral machinery generating an efficient systems of governance. Ajay Naik, CEO of the Bihar, in 2016, termed electoral governance during election time a pristine form of governance. It's a pristine form. It's something which is pure, something which is uncorrupted. This pristine nature of government was because of the distinct identity of the ECI as a body, which was inside but also outside the government. It is government at that point of time because that is the point when actually bureaucracy is isolated from the political masters. So it is inside of the government, but it is also outside in the sense the political executive, the elected executive won't play an important role. To a large extent, however, it was also because in election time, as Naik put it, ECI writs runs. Ironically, however, when the ECI does its job properly, which would mean that it constrains the party in power effectively, this would not be liked by the government. But for the ECI, it was not only what the EC does, but the kind of picture the EC wishes to present to the people. It is a statement of perception. Indeed, governance in election time is marked by remarkable efficiency. Naik points out that individual officers may be efficient in normal times, but such officers are dispersed unevenly across the state, and the general administration shows huge variation. During election time, however, there is accepted minimum which every official is expected to perform. And the EC conducts election at a specific minimum level of efficiency. There may be some variations, but not a lot. And then we have other instances coming from Shoaib Iqbal and others. So where Anganwadi workers, which Sir was talking about, so once they were involved in the electoral process, actually even once election was over, Anganwadi systems worked. So many times ASHA workers, when they were involved, so after some time the momentum was that even ASHA workers worked. So the point which I'm making is, even in this whole wider framework, inconsistent framework, where some institutions work, other institutions are failing. Some work very well. So how can we pick up elements of governance from those aspects and translate into larger framework? Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Just a small observation.
You are PW1,
Right, sir? Thank you. Should I stand up and deliver?
Because they're recording,
Right, sir. No, all I was just trying to make a very small nuance of a observation. ECI in elections is government. It's not government in government. And that, I think, is a fundamentally important issue which makes it so much more efficient than other institutions that you might be told. It becomes a government. That's the nuance I wanted to point out.
You know, the civil service, which is often perceived to be tardy and so on, in elections, as you yourself said, it's a huge exercise. It performs very well. I don't want to take much time, but I think to put it in 2 sentences, wherever horizontal delegation of authority at every level, where system of accountability is there and adequate resources assured, the bureaucracy performs very well. This is so in elections. This is also so when there are natural disasters. So you found that a bureaucracy which is often perceived to be not responsive, adequately responsive, responds very well and is actually acknowledged universally.
I really enjoyed all the 4 perspectives, and they were different ones. And I'm so impressed by Mr. Saxena's blunt presentation, such honest presentation. I wish I had heard you much earlier. I have 2 small observations to make. One is regarding the accountability which we have been talking about. And the accountability may be important, but I think accountability seems to have overtaken even the audit. It has actually subsumed audit within itself. And that actually becomes a big problem. I am from health sector. We had the issue where the malaria workers were not reporting the correct number of malaria cases. And we had such a sad face we cut through in international scenario when we said it is not 48,000, it's 4,000. Same happens for dog bites. Recently, we had these deaths of the children in Rajasthan and before that in Gorakhpur. Now, we are wanting to fix the accountability. Accountability can wait. and accountability actually in real terms, my perception is it has become negative protection. What we need to do is, my perspective, from such experiences, bad experiences, we should have learning experience. We should not be hanging everybody. Because if we are hanging, everybody becomes defensive and plays it safe, as sir you said. We need to have learning experiences. They will be as good as the outcome assessments which we have been talking and which we speak of in healthcare sector all the while. That's my first observation. And the second I want a view on, the steel frame is actually no longer steel. It has become a alloy frame. It is changing. There is a paradigm shift. There is a transformation. I am also told that the new constituents of the steel frame or alloy frame also have a different perspective. There is a paradigm shift. Now, whether it is good or bad, we don't know, but the newer generation, the younger generation, I find they are very focused. I don't know what goes into the alloy frame, but they are very focused. But what we need for the governance is some kind of a compassion, commitment, and dedication. What is the inner perspective of the selectors and the trainers as to where this compassion, commitment, and dedication is going in the new steel or alloy frame?
The selector and the trainer do a reasonably sound job. When the person goes into the field, then he's in the hands of Mr. Ponty Chadha. That factor, put in a light frame, is a factor not to be ignored, because that supervenes, it's overpowering, it sees you transferred by the evening. So over a period of time, what has affected the psyche of the officialdom on the ground, including the state level officers, it's not the monopoly of the All India services to be competent and honest. State officers are also very good, but they get so subdued. A large percentage amongst them join the bandwagon to survive. The others get weeded out anyhow, made in charge of a library or some municipal store, or sent to look after a non-existent office. That happens all the time, even today. So select, मैं कह रहा था ना, chief trainer, chief selector तो मेरे पास बैठे.
मैं एक छोटा सा comment
You call
on
it
this.
हाँ जी, हाँ.
छोटा सा comment. Because today, in fact, for the last several years, almost 80% of the people who qualify are engineers or medical doctors. When the ICS first started, it was felt that liberal education must be the base for civil servants because you want to develop the mind. So the engineers are very focused, very knowledgeable, expert in their subject, but a little bit of the sensitivity, compassion, empathy seems to be missing.
एक सब मैं जवाब दे दूं, पॉन्टी चड्ढा का जवाब है, बहुत सिंपल जवाब है. जवाब ये है कि गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया should issue instructions, and the joint secretary can do it, that everything which is being distributed at the Anganwadi center has to be locally cooked. It will not. It will reduce grand corruption to zero. It will also mean petty corruption. In midday meals program, there is petty corruption, but there is no grand corruption. So therefore, there is an answer. And I tried this as Supreme Court Commissioner. I met the Prime Minister on this. Unfortunately, Government of India did just the reverse. Government of India today has an order saying that whatever food is being given at the Anganwadi center has to be certified by some laboratories in Government of India. So therefore, what it means is that it can be done only by contractors like Ponty Chadha, because they can go and bribe the fellows sitting in the food laboratories. The local cook cannot go to.
That's why the joint secretary can't.
Very important issue you've raised, sir. When we got into service and earlier, the Joint Secretary was the policy maker in the Government of India. That's where the buck stopped. The question is, why isn't the Joint Secretary doing this?
Mind you, even when you were Joint Secretary, you were doing it.
Sir, with your permission, I was, yes.
I
Because I happen to work under Mr. Vora.
In the Home Ministry for Kashmir, which was dealing, 80% of the work was done by him. Now, it's another matter that we didn't implement those ideas or we...
Earlier I was JS Kashmir, when Mr. Vora was Home Secretary.
ये काम करते थे.
So, question, sir, is why is the Joint Secretary not doing or being able to do what he's supposed to be doing in this structure? That is the question. Not being allowed.
See, there are cases where huge corruption is involved. I can understand that Joint Secretary would be not capable of doing that, but there are many other apolitical cases, apolitical solutions. Let me tell you the solution to the problem of bogus reporting. What they do in Thailand. In Thailand, what they do is they do weighing of all children monthly in a mela. They organize a fair. Everyone is given tea and biscuits, and in front of everyone, child is weighed. Today, if you go to India in any village, ask the parents, do you know the weight of your child? Doesn't know. So therefore, create awareness. All you have to do is issue the order that don't do payment in sitting in the Anganwadi center. Do it openly.
Sir, I was just wondering, there was a thought which came to my mind. I retired as Chief Commissioner of Income Tax, and earlier I was in the Central Vigilance Commission, where I had an opportunity to examine much that goes wrong in the whole of Government of India and its public sector, as well as its other undertakings, banks, for example. Much has been written recently about how behavioral economics can be used to change behavior, which we want to induce. And a lot of findings which have come recently are singularly applicable also to people who work in organizations, particularly governmental organizations. The point really is that as human beings, we respond to incentives and disincentives. If everybody is going to go up to the top, and if every person who joins the income tax service is going to end up as chief commissioner, then how do you distinguish between good officers and bad officers? And how do you? That is a question. You have to lay down performance standards. It's not difficult to do that. I mean, it's a department like income tax, for example, the work is preeminently susceptible to measurement. You can also find out how many complaints are coming against a particular officer, how many grievances he has redressed, how many grievances were received, how many cases of his go in appeal and he loses. But if a person keeps on making careless additions and you don't do anything about it, then he'll continue to do it all his life.
A system of measurement. Every department, every cadre, every sub-cadre, they have a system of annual reporting, assessment, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but then you don't use it.
Now it is put aside. When Mr. Madhukar Gupta is to be given a job, he will get it. So now they will not look left and right, who else is there, and what is his performance vis-a-vis the others. आप जो कह रहे हैं दुरुस्त है, पर system तो टेढ़ा हो गया ना. There is nepotism, there is corruption, there is favouritism, casteism, politicization of the cadres, in management of the cadres. So उसमें जाने में तो और 3 घंटे लगेंगे. Now it's 8 o'clock and our style and system is that we have to stop here. You, Borkar Sahab, you want to say something?
No, just two can we take quickly?
नहीं, अब 8 बज गया. हाँ, last speaker, आप बताइए.
Yes, thank you so much. My question to Mr. Saxena. Now, well, this dialogue between Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel, and in your own view, the need to reform, the language from civil to public service. Also, we need to revisit the whole question of contingent history. That means how do we have to create a different kind of service? And here I would like to ask Professor Ujjwal Singh also, in terms of normative political theory then how do we have an administrative process which is not just administering but communicative? It is in that sense we also need to build upon the whole civilizational experiment. I am here remembering the officials in Emperor Ashoka's time. They were required to travel and travel quite a lot on foot. Now, this whole kind of colonization of the administrative system, so how do we transform it through these kind of emancipatory civilizational realities, if the officers work more with the people? So I just wanted to bring some of these thoughts in terms of rethinking and reconstituting the civil service today and rethinking the whole centralizing kind of concern, and how do officers just do not embody a centralizing logic and much more a kind of decentering way of
This
looking
point
at
is well taken, Professor Giri. We will not have not debated any further. Now it's 8 o'clock. I am supposed to close it at 8 o'clock. You want to say something?
No, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the panel. Thank you very much, especially Vora Saab, who agreed to moderate and did it so well. Thank you very much.